Hi, welcome everyone. This is part 2 of Blind Spots Exposed. Stop resisting the success you deserve. We have a fantastic program planned for all of you today, but we need to make sure that you get organized and get set up for success. A part of getting set up for success is to, number one, access your Habit Finder assessment results. On the web browser, log into habitfindercoach.com/Amanda Ferris with the email address you use to take the Habit Finder, then click My Assessment to access your results. All right, I'd like to welcome you to, again, Aptos Professional Development and introduce to you Tracy Nicholson. Hey, good afternoon, Tracy.
How you doing, Tara? How's everybody doing? Looks like we've got a few people in so far, so glad to have you here for our part 2 of our Blind Spots Exposed. Hopefully you all had a chance to go and watch the recording of part 1, but we are going to cover some initial information, kind of do a quick review of what we covered during part 1, so don't worry if you haven't, but definitely if you get a chance, go back and take a look at that. If you haven't done the Habit Finder assessment yet, you might not want to do it in the middle of this, so you can focus on what we're talking about here, but definitely you're going to want to do that as well. We all here have taken it, and it's wonderful. It's got some great information there, so we think you're going to really enjoy this session. And definitely, if you want to kind of sit tight, we'll be getting going here in a little bit. We do have some polls that Amanda is going to go through as part of her introduction. So if you haven't already found the chat and the poll options, open those up, because we're going to use that to interact with you as a group. Definitely, if you have any comments, questions, or anything that you want us to make sure that we're covering during the session today, put that in chat, and we'll make sure that Amanda gets that and covers that for us as well.
Fabulous. And Tracy, did you know that over 300 people actually took the assessment?
I think that's amazing. Yeah, so we are going to be covering the results of that, so you can see how you compare to everyone else that's taken the assessment so far. So I think it's exciting. I've got my results open, and I'm going to be listening carefully to see what I can learn more about here as well. So yeah.
Excellent. And another good thing is that they can look back at the recording that happened prior to this to dive deeper into the early part of the assessment, because I know Amanda's going to be able to just glide over the first part of the assessment because of the last session that we had. So then everyone will have the opportunity to really go back, take a look and listen at that, so they have a better understanding, and then be able to move forward. And that's a whole part of this, is it's all about moving forward. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's great that Amanda can also help people individually if they decide that they want to do even a deeper dive than that. So not only are we giving you some initial tools here, but we're going to leave you with some additional ones to really kind of help you deep dive into how to really be successful, moving forward. So definitely everybody deserves to be the best that they can be, and that's really why we're doing these sessions for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, any questions that you may have, please put it in chat. We want to make sure that we answer everyone's question, as well as Tracy did a great job in putting in chat the Habit Finder assessment results and where to get it on the web. And it's important that you use the email address that you use to actually take the Habit Finder, and then click My Assessment to assess your results.
Yeah. You can't get your results through the app. You got to go into some type of a web browser, either on your tablet, your computer, or even your smartphone. But yeah, that's the best way to get at them. I know I fumbled with that last time a little bit, thinking I could get back to them through the app. The other thing I think Amanda had mentioned is you can do the assessment as frequently as you want to, but it probably makes sense to wait and do it maybe like every 6 months, or just so that if you do integrate some ideas and some suggestions into your life, that you give it time to let the changes happen and see where you're at that point in time. But yeah.
So as we make changes to be more successful, we're going to have to give it time to marinate to make those changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Excellent. And we have over 120 people that's already signed up for this session. And I know from past behaviors when it comes to AFTO that typically they show up right exactly on time, but we wanted to get started to make sure everyone had time to have up on their screen this presentation, but also to have, if you have a dual screen, have your assessment up there. So as you go through this course and go through this training session, you can look at your results compared to the AFTO membership. And what's great about the AFTO membership is it's composed of regulatory, federal, state, and local, as well as industry and academia. So, and consumers, of course. So we have a great broad spectrum of stakeholders that are out here trying to make a difference for public health. Absolutely.
Yep. And actually, if you want to, go ahead and chat and say maybe where you're from geographically and which of those sectors that you're in, so we can kind of get to know who you are as well.
That is wonderful. Yes. So let's see where you're from. Let's see who's in the house. Come on, don't be shy. I know you're there. Open up your chat box. All right, Tiffany, industry, Reading, Pennsylvania. Excellent. Good to see you, Tiff. Awesome. Who else is out there? Hello from Baltimore. Hi, Sherry. Good to see you. Who else do we have? We have John from Gilbertsville. Fantastic. Sherry from Maryland Department of Health. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. Carla from Eagleville. Fantastic. We are super excited to see everyone. And Tracy, you're in Texas, is that correct?
I am in Texas, so we've got a nice windy day here, nice and sunny, and a little bit on the warm side, but pretty windy out there. So if you hear any gusting going on, that's coming from my end. We're ready
Very
to blow
good.
away here. Yeah. So definitely. And for those that have just joined, we're just kind of getting started here. Please make sure that you follow the instructions on the screen in terms of finding your Habit Finder assessment results. You can go on any web browser, type in the address there, and click on your My Assessment. We will be using both chat and the poll options, so make sure you have those open and ready to go so that once we start the session, you can engage with us at that point in time.
And in addition to that, we have the chat box open to find out who you are, where you're from, who do you represent? Are you with regulatory, industry, academia? We are delighted to have everyone joining this program. We know a lot of people will also be able to view this in the future. So it's going to be put online so you can access it. Again, stop resisting the success that you deserve. It is going to be an amazing program for all of you. Please have your assessment there. You can print it out or have it on your screen so that we can get started with today's program as we go through this. And to give you an idea of how Tracy and I are going to work is she's going to drive and I'm going to take care of the questions. So she's going to drive the program. And then, of course, Amanda will be giving us words of wisdom. So if you would, let us know where you're from and who you represent. Is it industry, regulatory? Perfect. Hi, Jessica from Colorado. Excellent. Welcome. Glad you're here. Who else do we have? We see a lot of people filtering in now. That's fantastic. So if you haven't clicked onto your assessment, get your assessment to access your results so you can follow along in this program. If you have any questions, please put them in chat so that we can help address everything and anything for each one of you. And of course, get ready to use your polls. So Tracy, when you did the assessment, did you find anything shocking or about this in any way? Or what are your thoughts in order to get started today?
Yeah, so I did find some things that were interesting there. I found some that I think made sense based on my general personality and thought processes. But yes, there was a few things on there that I was like, I might want to have a discussion with Amanda to see how this affects my my work life, my professional life, my personal life, and maybe if there's some things I can do differently to try to kind of work through them and break down those barriers and those blind spots. But I think I know I have them. My husband certainly knows I have them and is happy to point them out. So,
you know what? We all have them. And that's why this program is so beneficial, is because everyone can improve. Everyone can be a better person. Everyone can be better at what they do to protect public health. Okay, so if you've just joined us, welcome, welcome, welcome to the Apto Professional Series. My name is Tara Pastor Camarada. I am super excited to be one of your facilitators today, along with, take it away,
Tracy Michelson. Welcome here, and we're happy to have you here today for our second part to our blind spots exposed to stop resisting the success you deserve. As we had mentioned earlier, the part 1 is available. It was recorded and is available on the APTA website. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that, you can certainly go back and take a look at that one as well.
Perfect. And in chat right now, we're putting in, who do you represent, industry, regulatory, or academia, or the consumer, and where you're from and who you represent. So if you want to put that in chat, that would be fantastic. Also, if you have your results, please put them up so that you can review your results as the presentation continues and as we drive this process of stop resisting the success that you deserve.
Yep.
Okay, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. So get ready to go.
And don't forget to have the poll option open as well. We're going to be doing a few polls here in a little bit as well to kind of kick off the presentation with Amanda.
Absolutely. And up here on the screen, you can see to get your assessment, all you have to go to is habitfindercoach.com/Amanda Ferris. Put your email in that you used in order to take the Habit Finder, and then click My Assessment to actually access your results. Okay, with that being said, I say it's time that we get started today. What do you think, Tracy?
Absolutely. Let's kick this off.
Okay, welcome everyone. I want to talk about rules of engagement first. So again, you need to have your Habit Finder assessment results open and ready to review so you get the most out of this program. Also, open the poll tool to answer any of Amanda's introductory questions. And then we're definitely going to use chat. My job here today is to make sure I monitor chat and make sure that all of your questions get answered. Also, feel free to use your emojis. Feel free to actually engage in any way, because remember, it's all about you. Apto's professional development is all about you. Above all, have fun. Feel free to participate in the discussion, and we are here to learn from each other. So the poll tool. Tracy, do you want to talk to them about the poll tool, where that is?
Yes, it should be when you're looking at your Zoom webinar down in the right-hand corner, there should be a chat, a Q&A, and a poll. Now, sometimes that doesn't pop up right away if we haven't launched the polls yet, I believe. So if it's not there and available, let's just wait until we get to the poll and we can figure out at that point if we need to do it. Sometimes you have to open it up within Zoom yourself as an option. Hopefully that won't be the case. I think that should just go live once we have the polls going. So I'm fairly good at Zoom and WebEx, but I still sometimes fumble with it just a little bit. So, all right.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Tracy, do you want to do the introduction?
Absolutely. So welcome everybody. We're so excited to have Amanda back again. And actually, while she did part 1, this is actually her 3rd time with us. She did do a webinar earlier this year in conjunction with our neuroscience expert. So you can definitely go back and watch that session as well, that webinar as well. But just in case you haven't joined us for any of those sessions or any of the other ones that we put on with AFTO. We just kind of wanted to introduce ourselves. So Tara and I have been doing some various webinars. We started out with some food delivery webinars, and it's kind of transitioned into this mental health awareness session or topic. So, but anyway, so we're kind of your dynamic hostesses that's going to be running the show, as Tara mentioned. Amy, she likes to stay off camera. She's a little shy, but she is our wizard behind the curtain who has been helping us so much lately. So we just love having her. And then Amanda Ferris is our presenter for today, our host. And she's our teacher and coach that's going to run us through all the great information that she has. And obviously you. So as Tara mentioned, we really want this to be engaging and as beneficial to you as possible. So use the chat, use the polls, let us know what you're thinking, feeling, have any questions. We absolutely want you to engage. So not since Amanda has been here, we're not going to go too deep into her biography, but what we do want to say is that she is an amazing business consultant and leadership advisor. She is also a author and host of the Goal Next Door podcast, something you should definitely listen to, and the original Habit Finder performance coach. So again, if you want to learn more after today, she is your point person for that. You can reach out to her. We'll have some contact information at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to get us going. Welcome,
All right, Amanda.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy, Tara, Amy, AFTO, and for all of you who are here live on the call, or if you're watching the recording in sometime in the future land. Before we kick things off, as mentioned before, we're going to go ahead and just do this poll just to get an idea of where we're all at today. Whether you were a part of the previous webinar or not, this will be fun. So the first question is, have you taken the Habit Finder assessment? So if you haven't, the link's provided here. I highly recommend doing that, and feel free to have any family members, colleagues, anybody that you know take this. This isn't a chargeable assessment. You can go ahead and take that and take a look at that. If you want to go deeper, we'll talk about that later, what that looks like, but it's a great way to gauge and measure our thoughts. So if you have taken it, awesome. If you haven't, the link's provided here. Also, we're curious, did you attend or watch the previous webinar? It's not a prerequisite, of course, to participate today, but just curious who has been a part of that and if there's any new faces here. Also, we're curious if you feel like over the last 18 months, do you feel if your capacity to achieve your goals has changed? So that could be in your personal or professional life, but just asking, do you feel like the goals that you would normally go after, does it take more effort? Does it feel harder? Does it feel like you're able to do that like you normally would? Or do you feel like there might have been a change since then? And then also, how do you feel about those around you, whether it's your colleagues or your team? Has their ability to perform changed over the last 18 months? So go ahead and answer in the poll and submit. Also, when you have a second after you've done the poll questions, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. What's the number one thing you think is standing in the way of getting what you want? And you can take this however you'd like, whether that's a personal want or a professional want. What's standing in the way? And then if there's any tools that you use right now or have used in the past to increase your performance, your ability to achieve, whether that was a coach, counseling, therapy, accountability groups, are there certain books or other professional development tools that you use? Go ahead and share that in the chat and spread the love around for those of us who are on a journey of lifelong learning. You might be helping out some folks here today. So some good ones here. Spinning too many plates. Absolutely. Limited budget. Thank you. Yes. Resistant to change. Excellent. So for those of you who have your assessment results in front of you, even if you don't come back to those later, those are always going to be available to you. I also recommend, while we're waiting for the poll questions to come up and to see the results, if you can, if you're not driving, so safety first, but if you can, grab a piece of paper and a pen or however you take notes, because I think there's going to be some pretty amazing ahas that come up here today. But excellent. So the results are in. 90% of the participants here today have taken the assessment, excellent, and 10% have not, so there's still time. You can do that after this webinar, absolutely. And again, I invite you to invite your friends and colleagues to do that as well, so that they can remove those barriers standing in the way of their success. We do have about 58% that have participated in that first webinar and 42% who have not. And when we look at our capacity to achieve, our ability to achieve goals over the last 18 months, 65% of you said yes, that ability has changed, and 35% said no, it has not. And then the fourth question, just to gauge kind of our perception of others' ability to achieve or perform, 68% of us said that yes, we feel that others' ability to perform has changed, and 32% didn't see any changes. So wow, that's pretty amazing observations there. So thank you so much for those of you who participated in the poll for the Habit Finder. I'm thrilled to dive in, and also throughout our session today, as Tara mentioned before, she'll be taking a look at the chat for any questions, for any ahas, anything that stands out. Feel free to capture that there. And if you have any questions whatsoever, whether it's about reading your assessment results or anything that is covered today, you can always reach out to me and my team at hello@cloverkind.com, and we'd be happy to get back to you and dive right in. So before we kick things off, before we get into the Habit Finder, I know we're all very excited to see what our results are. I'll definitely review what it is, how it works, what we can do, and then what the next steps are going to be after you have identified your blind spots. But something I want you to write down, or I'm inviting you to write down, is if you could unlock one thing in any area of your life, again, this could be personally, professionally, what would it be? And write it down, because we will come back to that. There's one thing in your life that you could unlock, any area, what would it be? And then that question about what's standing in the way, feel free to add to that as we go through the Habit Finder results when you're looking at yours, or if we cover anything in the conversation, to jot that down as well, because I think, like I said, I think there's going to be some ahas of there might be some things standing in the way that we didn't realize. And the first step is absolutely having awareness. So why are we here? Today, we are going to identify areas that hold us back from showing up as our best self. Okay, so what that can look like is different for everybody. There are like 40 quadrillion different potential varieties of a Habit Finder assessment. That number doesn't even seem real to me. So I want you to bring your funny bone along to this session. When you're looking at your assessment, it is not a judgment of who you are as a person. It is not to diagnose any mental illness. It is not a personality assessment, but what it is going to show you the proverbial noise in your head, just a snapshot of that, so that you can take a look at what are those areas, what are those thought processes that are experiencing pressure. It's kind of like a heat map. So we're able to take a look at that and then just really go at it and explore, because remember, we are not our thoughts, and we have the ability to practice metacognition. Well, cognition is thinking. Metacognition is having thoughts about our thoughts. So I invite you, as thoughts come up, to take note of what those thoughts are and then step back. I wonder where that thought is coming from. And I wonder how that's showing up in my life right now as it relates to that thought process. And once we have clarity on what those areas are, even if we don't know specifically why it's holding us back or how it's showing up, it can at least reduce some of that stress in the day-to-day and the anxiety, so that we can at least have that power back of, okay, I have a choice now. I can focus on this. I can go down that rabbit hole. I can go, I know how that ends up. It's going to be self-sabotaging, or it's going to set off bombs in my relationships or in the workplace. At least we have clarity. So now we can have that power back to make a better choice. And we can redirect that focus to get better results. And it also is going to save us a lot of mental energy. So over the course of time, we can start to see measurable results and start to have a greater capacity to achieve, whether that's performing our day-to-day or going after our goals in life. So it can be incredibly empowering. It takes a great deal of courage to be able to look at ourselves in this manner and to be really honest, and to realize, like, we can't ride that blame train anymore. We can't blame our coworkers. I mean, certainly there are external factors that impact the mental noise that's going on. Any of these feelings on this slide that you can resonate with, those are certainly things those are symptoms. That's how it shows up for us. But we are absolutely in the driver's seat of our own life. We don't have to be victim to our thoughts. And because of neuroplasticity, we can change those. And over time, we can start to rewire our brains, to put it in layman's terms. So what's the payoff of this session? So whether it's in this recorded session or live, or you decide, excuse me, to revisit this at another time, anytime that we're practicing metacognition, we're taking a look at our thoughts. Are they serving us? Where do we want to go? That increases our self-awareness. And when our thoughts are brought to our conscious mind, now there's competing data and research on how many thoughts a person has in a day, ranging from 6,000 thoughts all the way up to 80,000 thoughts. The most recent study that I could actually read the study and not just a quote from it, it was around 6,000 thoughts, but we can all agree that's a lot of thoughts to have in one day. And the research also shows us that those thoughts, over 80% of those are the same thoughts that we had in previous days. So if you're like, oh, what was that thought that I got? It was holding me back. Chances are it's going to come up again. So you'll have another chance to reevaluate it. But once we are empowered to make those changes, we get to choose where we want to go. And like I said before, we can start to feel a difference. This is our thoughts over time are going to start impacting our emotions, and then also our capacity to achieve and grow and show up in our world. And these results are measurable over time, not just on the habit finder. If you look at this in an organizational level, we all have, whether you're looking at the performance in terms of sales, service levels, you're looking at your P&L, retention, acquisition, whatever those things are that we measure, whatever we measure in our business or our organization is all impacted by these measurements of what's happening in our brain. So when you think about what's an organization's most valuable asset, it's its people, right? Well, you as a leader, whether that's of yourself or your organization, you might see yourself as, oh, I'm good, everything's great. But if we take a look at where the rest of the world is at, you yourself or the people around you are going to be dealing with noise in the head. And we need to be able to do something about that. So instead of falling victim to that and saying, oh, I'm hemorrhaging people in my business, or we are dealing with these struggles in our sales, we can actually distill it down to the individual. And while an organization can't be responsible for the noise in somebody's head, so to speak, we can all take ownership and responsibility of what's happening behind the scenes so that we can show up as our best self, whether that's at work, in our personal lives, and get what we want. So that can be incredibly empowering. And when we have a capacity that grows, we can also be that beacon for others and showing others how they can own their thoughts, how they can own their personal development. And that's real leadership. So I highly recommend setting aside some time for yourself after this webinar to really go deeper for yourself. Now, there is an opportunity for you to schedule time with me. We'll talk about that later. But the point is, if we're spending all of this time in our minds, in our business, doing the thoughts, doing the things, all of the tasks, and we don't ever take time to step back and go, hey, what's actually going on? Is this working? Is this serving me? We might just be engaging in frenetic activity, whether that's externally or internally. And that's really not going to get us anywhere, because that's where we start to feel stuck. Now, in the past, has anybody here gotten in their own way? Just me? Okay, so what are those ways that you have gotten in your own way? Now, you might be aware of what those are because you had the benefit of an external consequence, whether that was a boss or a spouse or a family member or friend who called you out, or that maybe there was some other kind of consequence. But what about all of the thoughts that are running on silently in the background that we've normalized so much that we don't even realize how that is affecting our lives internally and externally? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So if you can have your habit finder ready, we haven't said that enough, and then really dive deep, go deeper after the webinar. Think about, how is this showing up? And what do I want to get out of this? Do I want to continue feeling stuck in this area? Do I want to continue showing up like this? Or do I want to have more meaningful connections, whether that's in my relationships with my coworkers, with my work itself, or with the world around me and my goals for the long term? Now, before the pandemic, there was a statistic that 1 in 5 adults experiences mental illness. Now, more recent numbers show us that it's more close to 1 in 4 adults. Now, this isn't to say that you yourself are dealing with mental illness, but we do need to bring awareness to mental health. Now, when we talk about the habit finder, again, it's not a diagnostic of a mental illness, but what it can do is gauge the overall health of our thoughts, our habits of thinking, so that overall we can have strong supporting thought processes, but long before a mental health event ever occurs. What was interesting is recently, people analytics firm Visier released a number about this year, 2021, 1 in 4 workers have voluntarily quit their jobs. So that's a lot of people. I'm not suggesting that the same people are quitting that are also dealing with mental health issues. That's not where the correlation is. But what I really want to focus on is, I mean, you might be feeling this as a business owner or as a leader, if you're losing people, or people are just dealing with this shifting climate of events. We're kind of all in the suspended animation of what's going to happen next. How do we shift? We've just been constantly pivoting. It's exhausting, not just physically, but mentally. So where in some talks, we have focused on the mental health side of things when it comes to reducing depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and eliminating suicide. Today, we're going to focus on the other people that are still in your business, still in your life, or yourself. So when we talk about all of the people that are leaving their workplace, what's left? What happens when those people are leaving the workplace? The work still needs to be done. So you might have experienced this in your own job. Even as a solopreneur, you might not have any employees that have voluntarily quit this year, but you're certainly dealing with this exterior element of what's happening in the world and shifting, challenging, changing times. So what are we going to do about that? How do we support, empower, and equip those people who are still in the organization to be able to show up? The way I think about it is, if we decided one day, say, hey, everybody, we're going to go run a marathon, other people might not have the ability to run that marathon. Everybody's going to have varying degrees. Some people might fly in, they might drive in, they might already be physically fit. So running a marathon might not be a big deal. But for what about the rest of those people? They might have a challenge actually getting there. So think about the mental gymnastics that we all go through on varying degrees before we even show up to work, before we even show up to our day. There are mental strengths that we have, and they're going to be on your habit finder assessment. We'll talk about that in a second. But when those strengths are either under supported or inflamed, there's too much focus, there's too much pressure, then what happens is those strengths can be used against us. And we'll talk about how this might show up for an entrepreneur or for somebody in a day in the life in just a bit. But keep in mind, when you're taking a look at your habit finder assessment results, again, this is not about you as a person. These are just thoughts, and we have the ability to change them. So again, I invite you to have this attitude of exploration. And if you do feel triggered, if you feel like, man, she just called me out, I don't like this, that's all right. Use that opportunity to practice the metacognition. Oh, I just got triggered by that. Let me write that down. Where is that coming from? And how is this showing up in other areas of my life when I'm interacting with other people? Am I judging myself quite a lot? Is this what's bothering me? And just as another reminder, if you're looking at this from an organizational perspective, and you might think, well, we have performance improvement plans and we have, other types of coaching. You know what? There are a lot of wonderful tools out there. But typically, if we're waiting to work on our performance when there's a problem, it's probably too late. It's a much better investment of your time, even if it's just a few minutes a day, to step back from what's happening in your world to go, okay, what do I want to do to support my strengths? And what do I want to do to remove the barriers that are standing in the way of me showing up as my best self? And as a leader, how can I do that for my people? How can this is a great way to open up a conversation. Now, when you take the habit finder, these results are yours. So if you choose to share that with others, great. If you choose to keep them confidential, awesome. I encourage that. What we do, to give you a little bit of a background about the Habit Finder assessment. So we talked about this in the last webinar a little bit. So this is a scientifically, mathematically accurate assessment tool. It uses inductive and deductive science. We work on the 3 dimensions of thought, which are intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic. And we use Cantor's transfinite calculus combined with the Hartman value profile. That's a lot to remember. So I won't bog you down with too many more details, but I always like to share that because people are like, this seems like a really woo-woo tool. How did it know? Well, you know what? It's great. It's as accurate and precise as a thermometer reading the temperature. So when we take a look at these thoughts, this is accurate. And you know that over time, so I think Tracy mentioned this just a few minutes ago, you can take it again in 6 months and you'll probably see a change if you've made changes. You could take it again in 12 months and still see some changes if you make changes. If I decided today, I want to lose some weight, but I don't do anything about it and I get on a scale in 6 months, do you think that there's going to be any changes? Well, probably not improvement in all likelihood. So I encourage you, when you use this tool, use it as a way to cultivate awareness, but also to inform the action that you want to see that change over time. And it's not going to happen overnight, but I mean, speaking of overnight, all of us have blind spots. All of us have these pressure points. And even last night, I caught myself, I study this stuff. I coach people all over the world on this. I caught myself last night going down one of those rabbit holes. And I'm like, oh, all right, I know what's going on here. I know where that thought process leads. And instead of resisting it, because that which we resist persists, I chose to embrace it. And just remember, like, that's just a thought. And the reason that's showing up is because I've spent a lot more time in that thought process in that way for it to show up. It's just on autopilot. I mean, we've all driven home from work or from the store and we're like, I know I was driving the car, but I don't really remember that route. Like, what happened in between? I made it home. Thank God I'm safe. But we have thought processes that run on autopilot. So when we can become aware of it, that's where we can go, oh, all right, I actually, thank you, thought. I appreciate that. We can embrace it. Then we can do something about it and just, instead of using that as a tool to beat ourselves up or have judgment. So I'm really obviously excited to go deeper here. So we talked a little bit about the Habit Finder, how it works. What's really interesting, so how I use this in my business is we'll either go in and work with individuals one-on-one, or we'll go into more of an organizational setting where we take all of the Habit Finder results from the group and then we aggregate it in an anonymized report. So you'll see a smaller version of that today, where you can kind of see the group results. And then if you want to compare, you can use that comparison thought process to see where you kind of land on that spectrum. So when we look at our inner world and our outer world, we're going to be showing up as the green. You are the green. And then any yellow, orange, or red is just that thought process and its pressure point or its ability, its noise level, if you will, to pull you away from showing up as your best self. Hey, Tara.
Hey, and that was the question. The question is on the report where it has no risk and then sabotaging habits. When you have occasionally these habits will attempt to sabotage your efforts, what do you mean by occasionally?
I love that question. It's really going to depend on the person, the situation. Now, if we all locked ourselves in a bubble and we didn't have any interactions with the outside world, whether that was in person or the news or people in our lives, and we lived alone as hermits, I might be able to answer that with more precision, but occasionally it is really going to depend on the person. And we could explore that because it's also something that plays off of all of the other measurements. So I'm actually really glad that question was asked, because we can zoom in on a particular thought process as a measurement, which is critical to having that initial understanding of an area that has pressure points. But we also need to recognize that the other thought processes that are surrounding it do impact that thought process and how it shows up as well. So this can be, I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours, and sometimes we do that in organizations, but what we want to do, other than focusing on, oh my goodness, how many times is this showing up? Like, step back from it without emotion and just consider, okay, I understand that I'm at risk to have it show up in this way. And then we'll talk about that, how that might show up. And we're only scratching the surface today, but using that as a point when it does show up, or exploring, anticipating your own habits where you might have a confrontation with a coworker or a family member, or there might be a high stakes situation in a workplace environment. You can anticipate that or reflect on previous examples of how that's shown up to come up with a game plan for yourself. And even if that game plan is, when I recognize that this is happening, I'm spiraling, or this is, I'm starting to panic, I'm starting to catastrophize, fantasize, do all these things, I'm starting to blame people, I'm getting angry, I'm feeling it in my body. When that happens, you can use that as a means to go, okay, my game plan is to pause and just acknowledge this is happening for me right now. And it's something, it's part of my life. Okay, great. I can either choose something in the moment to do differently. So you might choose to do a self-soothing exercise, or just put the thought on a shelf and revisit later. It's going to be different in every single situation. But what we'll do as we dive in is, I think I mentioned this before, but if you go onto your assessment results online, you can click on the measurement. It'll give you a little bit more information about what that thought process is and the particular measurement that's showing up for you. But again, feel free to email me, my team, or to book that one-on-one, and we'll go deeper and see how those different pressure points are playing off of each other, how that might be showing up in your life, so you can start to recognize how it's showing up and be able to move forward with more capacity, ease, and reduced stress, because less stress is much better. So if you remember taking the assessment, whether that was this morning or a couple of weeks ago or months ago, you can probably remember that there's 2 worksheets. And the first one we see is the inner world. So the inner world talks about how we have thoughts about ourselves. This is our expectations in life, our goals, our personal performance, our commitment, our clarity overall. And again, the blind spots, the things that are standing in the way of us getting what we want. And then when we talk about the outer world, those are the thoughts that we have about everything else. So without getting too much into it, just remember that when you see the measurement showing up, you are represented by the green. So if you've had a personality assessment, awesome. I'm not hating on those. I think there's a great place, but the personality assessment, where that falls into that category, is the green. So when you show up as your best self, these are your natural gifts. These are your strengths. These are your abilities. When we look at the habit finder, these are the thoughts that want to pull you away from that.
Perfect. And the question is, for the inner world on the report, that would be my dreams, my joy, and myself. And then the outer world would be people and work and structure. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah. So actually right now, what I'll do is we'll just do a review of the inner world and how that might show up. And
Great.
I'm only going to focus on the top risks that showed up for this group. And the first time around, we had about 150 assessment results overall. So since that time, we've had about 150 additional assessments. What's really interesting to me is that in a group of this size, you can add a bunch more data in. But when we have a lot of like-minded people, while there are varying measurements, there's a lot of themes that are similar. So it's interesting to see how that is. So after we review those first 2 measurements in the inner world, that would be my dreams and my joy. We'll then go into myself, and then we'll move into the outer world. So just to recap, when we are thinking about our thoughts, also consider how difficult, when you do have these thoughts, these challenging thoughts that come up about yourself, about your situation, what are those things that are the most difficult what are the things that are hard to get over. So if somebody says something and you feel like, oh, I'm feeling attacked about that, or I have a fear of failure or perfection, or I procrastinate, or I feel really obligated. This is how the my dreams area can show up when you have those thought processes. How difficult is it to get over that? When you think about that, that's when you ask yourself, how often is this happening? If I'm really honest with myself, how often is this happening? And what actually is happening? Am I playing out a scene that's not happening in the three-dimensional world? Am I just creating this catastrophe situation? I'll give an example. I didn't date for a really long time, and we're going super personal here, but I think this is important. When I did start dating again and engaged in this amazing relationship, I noticed that I had insecurities that I thought I healed, but as a pattern of some of these other relationships I had long ago, these thoughts were coming up. So even though the person in front of me wasn't doing anything to attack my personhood or who I am in the world, I was having this reaction in this conversation where I really internalized something that was all a thought process. It was all a thought process that was very deeply embedded. And what was happening is I was playing out the what if, and this, and then that will happen. And what would they think of me if this? None of that was happening in the real world. Okay, this was all happening in my mind. I had to stop myself and go, wait a second, this person has nothing to do with this. But if I chose to act on those thoughts about myself, I would potentially be setting off a bomb in that connection with that person. How does that show up in the workplace? I mean, there might be a pattern of behavior that a person has had when it comes to managing their work. And sometimes we know about the halo effect. This can work for us and against us, but we do this to ourselves as well. So I encourage you to think about, as we go through these, how is this showing up? But what do I want to do differently when I recognize this again in the future? What is actually happening in reality? Do you notice your heart's racing? Do you notice you get short of breath? Or do you shut down if you're starting to have these thoughts about yourself? And do you feel like, I just want to shut out the world? No more. I don't want to be seen. I mean, there are days that we all have. It doesn't matter how successful you are, how often you've been doing this work. There are still going to be times, in whether things are challenging outside of us or not, that we have these thought patterns that are going to show up for us. When we think about the My Dream section, actually, let me interrupt myself for a second. Another helpful way to think about these thoughts is if you are sitting at the head of a boardroom table, and all of the seats that are filled around this boardroom table are your thoughts. All of these different thought processes. Some are quiet, some agree with you when you have something to say, and will support you when you have an idea. Others are out of control. They will be loud, they'll be disruptive, and it's up to us to manage that boardroom of advisors in our head. And when we think about it that way, we can thank the thought. We can say, thanks for your input. I'm going to choose something else. Then it doesn't seem as loud. You can be represented as the green in this measurement, and you could have an area that shows up as yellow or orange. And you might be thinking, oh, well, at least it's not red. Well, I'm here to tell you that the color doesn't really matter, because if you're mostly aligned with your best self and you have a yellow or an orange measurement, it might actually feel like a red measurement. So when we're comparing our results to the group here, it can be like, oh, good, I'm in the clear. I didn't hit that risk area. Well, that might be true, that might not be, but it's really up to you. And it's like this. If you want to overanalyze it, we have a lot of analytical thinkers in this space right now, and that's a gift. But if you want to choose to use that gift of analysis to dive in, that can serve you tremendously. But if you choose to let yourself off the hook, I mean, there's a difference between that and giving yourself grace and self-compassion, then you really might be missing out on a huge opportunity to increase your capacity and get closer to that thing that you wrote down of what you want to unlock in your life. Other areas that might show up as a risk in your dreams or in how you feel about yourself or how you think about yourself is that you could be experiencing overwhelm, doubt, feeling stuck or skeptical. And you might even feel like it's difficult to make decisions. So there could be some hesitancy or uncertainty there. When we think about our joy, some of the top risks in this particular group are feeling disheartened. And could anybody blame you, really? There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of external things that are impacting that shifting horizon of our goals, the end zone, the finish line. It's moving. And some of them have disappeared altogether. So we really need to manage these thoughts, though, so that no matter if we are in that suspended animation because of a pandemic, because of what's happening in our businesses or whatever, that we can at least take a look at what we can control. If you were working with me one-on-one, I'd probably take this opportunity to write down what are the things you can control, and then let's focus on those. And what are the things that are absolutely nothing that you can control, but you can change your attitude or your thoughts toward that and reduce the pressure in that way. Because yeah, the reality is we can't control what's happening around us. But when it starts to show up as we start to blame others, or we feel like we choose to avoid confrontation or enable people around us because we're just too exhausted. We're too exhausted just doing the day-to-day stuff. You could feel impatient, unrecognized for the work that you're doing. You could feel overworked and underpaid. These are all thought processes that tell us something. If you're feeling frantic, if you're juggling, that's an area that's going to impact your overall joy. So when we talk about this third category in the thought measurements about ourselves, this is the big S, self. So this is about our self-worth, how we view ourselves. So we can go ahead into the next slide here. Now, the top risks in this group were really along the lines of, so there's the over focus, and then there's the under focus. So let me just clarify what that is again. You show up as the green. And when I talk about the risks and the groupings here, if I say a percentage or a number, I'm relating that to, so the under focused group, I'll say this percentage of the under focused. So this would be on the left-hand side for measurements. This would include all red, orange, and yellow measurements. And if I say a number related to the over focused measurements, that's going to be related again to the yellow, orange, and red combined for the over focused. So in our inner world, as we view ourself, what our value is. Now, keep in mind too, these thought processes, these names that are on each line, that is a name for the thought process. So it's not an indication of you saying, oh, I'm confident, I'm not confident. Oh, I'm peaceful, I'm not peaceful. No, this is the thought process. We could have named it Frank, but this is to help us realize what specifically that thought process is, what's happening neurologically speaking. So in this area, the top risks for this group all were in the under focus area. It was like a three-way tie, really. So a third were a top risk in self-directed, a third in the excellence category, and in committed. And then in the over-focus category, we had 70% on the intentional side. So what's going on here? This can show up as unmet expectations. What that sounds like in your head could be, I thought I would be better by now. I thought I would have had that job by now. I thought my business would be making this much money by now. Obviously that comparison thought process, whether you're on social media or in the office, like that person's getting what they want and they don't work as hard as me, where's mine? So these thoughts can show up in a matter of ways, but you might be too busy taking care of others. You could feel imposter syndrome, or even have thoughts that want you to be defensive. The other side of that would be yielding just to keep the peace. Yielding to avoid confrontation. You might fear, as a business owner, losing somebody, so you don't want to performance manage them if they really need it, because you're afraid that you're going to lose somebody when you really could use them. And when you feel that obligation to say yes when you know you shouldn't say yes, these are all high risk areas in this group. How is that showing up for you? How is that showing up in your business or your organization? And how is that standing in the way of what you want? So I noticed there was a bunch of activity here in the comments or the chat. We'll come back to that in just a second. So we're going to move into the outer world in just a minute. Hello, Tara.
Hi, so just one question. So what you're saying as a group for the AFTO group is that we have to work on the forgiving part and the valiant part as collectively as a group? Is that what it's saying?
So that's a great question. So in this measurement, when we look at the forgiving measurement, so remember, forgiving is just the name of that thought process. But what that can be is an under focus in an area where we're overcompensating for other people, other things. We can want to say yes when we should say no. That can lead to being spread too thin. Do you really think that working more hours is going to solve the problem? Probably not. But if this measurement came up for you, then that's something you definitely want to take a look at. And it's sadly something that's going to show up differently for everybody. So I can't do a complete like umbrella statement. But if you do have that measurement, and because it did come up for a large portion of the group, I'm curious actually, if anybody has anything to say to that on reflection, if as I'm talking about how this might show up, like,
well, I honestly find it ironic that the areas as a group that we came up with is questioning and burdens, because being frontline people on public health, that burden of taking care of the community, that burden of taking care of so many people during the pandemic, and then questioning, are we doing what we should be doing? So I just wanted to throw that out there, that this is very interesting from the AFTO group, because our stakeholders are made up of regulatory, industry, and academia. So it's just interesting that we're kind of all aligned. It doesn't matter what segment we're in, that we feel burdened and that we're questioning things.
I think that is a beautiful reflection, Tara. I mean, yeah. And what would happen if we flipped it? What if we said, okay, this is clearly an area that has a pressure point. What if we flip that thought process on its head and use that pressure point to our advantage? So if you're feeling that, how is that showing up? Is your department feeling that? Can we have a conversation about it? Are we having these conversations with our line managers or with our family? Look, I really want to make you breakfast every day. And I know in the past I might have, but right now I could just use a break. Like, can we figure out a way, how can we open up a conversation in the workplace? Like, I understand that 1 in 4 people have quit voluntarily this year. So the 3 out of the 4 left are shouldering the burden until we can bring those people in. So when we take a look at that, that might be a good time to reevaluate the way in which we approach those expectations about ourselves, whether that's for temporary or if we are questioning it, make it an open dialogue with others, because we can often fool ourselves. We can get stuck in this lane of thinking and it takes us somewhere that's not even real. It's not happening in reality. We're worst case scenario. We're catastrophizing it. So yes, Tara, so glad you brought that up, or whoever asked it in the chat, because we can use these to our advantage. So it doesn't have to be a gloom and doom thing. When we're looking at these and you feel the pressure, it's like, oh man, well, the good news is that once we unlock that, once we figure out, oh, this is a habit of thinking, it's a habit. So however long it takes you to change that habit of thinking, you can start to see really big results in a short amount of time, because that is a strength. You're just not using it to your advantage.
Amanda, thank you so much for reviewing our inner world for us. That really was beneficial. And now we're super excited to go on to the outer world. Awesome.
Thank you so much. Yes, this is exciting too, because this is how we translate now, not just our thoughts about ourselves, but our thoughts about everything else that's happening in the world. And we will break that down in just a second. So this isn't just about people. This is about how we complete tasks. This is about discipline and structure. And when I say those words as an entrepreneur, I instantly cringe. So we'll get to my very favorite conversation about some of those measurements and how that might be showing up for you. And just as a reminder, you're the green. But how are these thoughts trying to keep you from using your gifts to your advantage instead of getting in your way? And how often are you giving into these, even if you know where those go? So think about that. Now, when we look at the outer world, the top risks for this group, and the word hungry ghosts comes to mind. So we won't have enough time to really go into hungry ghosts, but if you have time, if you make time outside of this webinar to revisit that, if you find that some of these things are coming up for you, I highly recommend doing that in your own deeper work. So in this group, we can just go ahead to the next slide so we can see the measurements. When we're looking at these percentages in this group, the highest number of top risk in the measurement came under joyful. So when we talk about the things that are happening in the world right now, do you ever feel like you're hurting cats? Not hurting cats, don't hurt cats, but do you feel like overwhelmed, like there's a lot of stuff going on and that might actually cause you to be guarded? Is that taking away from your joy? Do you feel like you're preoccupied with others? This can also result in overfocus on physical attributes. So if you find yourself watching a video, somebody's taking you through a tutorial and you're thinking, oh, more than a thought of like, oh, I like that person's top, or that's an interesting eye color. If you're going deeper and you're not even paying attention to what that person is saying in that tutorial, you might have an overfocus in this area. This also impacts our ability to show up in a realistic manner and be persistent. Actually, that was a tie. And then grateful and effective showed up as well. So this is where you might feel drained. And I want to say this with compassion. You might feel drained by your loved ones. You might feel drained by your coworkers. You might love your business, but you could feel completely spent and even be questioning if you want to stay in business. This is very common for entrepreneurs, or Tara, as you mentioned, with the group that we have regulators that have been going through this. There might be a thought that wants you to throw in the towel because it's just too much. But there's also thoughts here that want you to be non-confrontational because somebody's got to do it, especially if it's your own business or something that's happening in your life. These thought processes can cause you, when they're inflamed, to distrust people with different beliefs. So in a time where we're all living on social media in our heads and algorithms are basically stacked against us to create this polarization. I won't go into any details on the topics there, but if you find yourself saying things to yourself, saying things to other people, even if it's just in your head about that person, and you're making a judgment call about who they are just because they don't agree with you, you might have an under or an over focus in this area. What the biggest risk is in life, not just our business, is that this frustration, this discord blinds us from seeing the people that are right in front of us. It blinds us from seeing and appreciating that person or that group of people's pain. And that cuts off our natural ability to be empathetic, which is probably the number one thing that would help us have a more peaceful existence day to day and overall from society to society. If we can just appreciate where another person is coming from. But if we have thought processes taking us away from that natural ability to connect with others, that could be as a parent, where you could say, get over it, kid. I don't want to hear your own. And it's like, that person is really struggling right now. If we can put ourselves in that person's shoes, then even if we don't agree with them, it'll help build those bridges. But these thoughts want to burn those bridges down. So what can also happen is that skepticism about others whether that's employees or customers or family members, is that that focus on what is wrong and not focusing on what's actually going well can lead us to destroying the things in our life, in our business, in our workplace, in our careers that are actually going really well because we're putting too much focus on it. Sometimes the opposite side of the spectrum is we are too trusting. And when we are too trusting, when we're not thinking for ourselves because we're so burned out, or because whatever situation's impacting this thought process for you, is it leaves us wide open to have that trust violated, which reinforces that negative thought process. So we are always going to find what we're looking for. And that's why I brought up hungry ghosts. So if that's happening for you, and whether that's thoughts about yourselves or thoughts about other people, what is that costing you? What is that costing your business? And what if it's left unaddressed? Then what is it going to cost you? It's probably going to be a lot more than people quitting their job. It's going to be a mess. So definitely recommend taking some time. And I say this with love and compassion in my heart, because if you have this thought process, it could be causing you to see things through a different lens, and the things that you actually value, the people, the relationships in your life, you could be missing out on those connections by picking on the little things, whether it's belief systems or a failure to empathize. And not only will that destroy those relationships and your ability to achieve in your business, your career, achieve your goals, but it will leave you feeling empty. And a lot of my clients struggle with that the most. And that's why, when we talk about the joy measurements, where these are thought processes that play into that, it's not something that we don't live in silos. We certainly don't live in silos in our head. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on to how this shows up with work specifically. So this is an area, obviously it impacts most of us here on the call, and whether you work in an environment with others or yourself, these can show up. So in this group, when we look at the measurements on the left, the under-focused measurements, nearly 70% are impacted when it comes to this competence measurement. So what I want to ask you is, when you're overwhelmed, do you procrastinate? Does anybody procrastinate here? And do we also have a propensity for perfectionism? Sometimes these thoughts can make us underestimate the resources required to get the job done. So this could be time management, productivity. You might see the effort required to get what you want or to do the task at hand as too much. And then you instantly resign yourself to say, well, it's not worth it. I don't want to do it. And if you have a team, if you're managing a team and your measurement is on one side for this thought process, and they're on the other, where you're like, let's go, let's do this, let's use this workload as inspiration to just go after it. But they're feeling like, oh, I can't do this. Don't even ask me to one more. They're checking out, and there can be some dissonance there. And that ultimately affects not just mental health, but the bottom line. So this is something that we can't put our heads in the sand about anymore. You might feel fatigued and you might lack motivation. When I say lacking motivation, that can mean a lot of different things. That could mean focus. It could just mean that you're tired. I think when we are showing up as our best selves, motivation isn't a problem. If we know where we want to go, we're going to find a way to get there. But if we have all these other things that are impacting that ability to show up, we're going to say, I'm not motivated, I'm not disciplined, I don't have the tools that I need, or I tried that before, it didn't work. And all of these thoughts just, and it's like, whoa, we've just whipped ourselves into a hot lather and we're not going anywhere. It's like, you ever had a day off and you're like, I'm going to be so productive. I'm going to do this around the house, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to work out. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to meal prep. And then, something happens. And then it's like, I can't even do the one thing. It's just, whatever. So that really helps us move into this next measurement of how we look at structure. But what I do before we move into the structure measurement, what I want to ask you is, what areas are you fatigued by in life right now? What are you overwhelmed by? Maybe you yourself aren't overwhelmed. Do you know anybody in the office, that is, and how is that showing up? How does that impact your interaction with them? Or if you need to collaborate on a project. So having these measurements, whether you have them or not, having the awareness is going to help you get better results as a team with somebody who might be having some of these pressure points screaming in their ear. We've all heard it said, you can't hit a target that you can't see. Well, what about the other things that are impacting your ability to see that? So take a look at the people around you, ask them more empathetic questions and how you can support each other, because having an extra meeting might help one person, and that extra meeting might actually be overwhelming another person and getting the job done. Tara, welcome back.
Okay, so obviously we've been in a worldwide pandemic. So help us move forward. We want to move forward. This group is very active in participating and helping their communities, from vaccines to inspections to reinventing themselves with virtual inspections. How do we move forward?
Great question. So it's kind of a loaded question, got to be honest. But okay, I will say this before we talk about the structure measurements. The number one thing in life, regardless of what's happening outside of you, in a pandemic, in your community, in your job, in your family, in your home, the number one thing that can help us move forward is this. And I would encourage you to write it down, because you'll want to revisit this if you're being really honest with yourself. So it takes a good deal of courage. The number one thing that's going to help you move forward is not just having the awareness. We're talking about that right now. It's making and keeping commitments to yourself. I'm going to say that again. It is making and keeping commitments to yourself. If you set out to do a diet, you set out to crush something in your business, you want to launch a new product, you want to build a different business, you want to quit your job, you want to do something else, you want to travel the world, whatever the thing is that you want to do, the things, the barriers that are standing in the way, yes, you can remove the barriers and it will increase your capacity. But if you don't have personal integrity with your plan to go after that, it doesn't matter, because you're going to just be stepping into your own way in a different way. I hope that makes sense. And I'm saying this to myself as well, because there are plenty of areas that I'd like to work on and improve on. But when it really gets down to it, when I remove the barrier, when I take apart the fear isn't really about the outcome. It's really not about, is it going to work? Is my plan going to work? Am I trusting myself? Well, the fear of not having love, whether that's for yourself or not being appreciated, that can really, I mean, that gets into a whole other realm of like coaching. We can't have that capacity if we don't first maintain that word to ourselves. So to bring it back to the question, the best way we can move forward is to start with ourselves. And when we do that, when we take responsibility for the thoughts in our head, for the structure we create in our workplace, in our business, in our environment, when we take responsibility for how we show up in relationships, resisting the need to be right all the time, when we do that, when we remove those barriers and we hold integrity and we make those plans, that's when we start to see progress, not just in ourselves, but it totally changes the dynamic in our relationships with others, because it brings down those barriers, the thought processes that are in their head. I think about when I'm working with teams and we aggregate their results, and I'm working with whether it's a leadership team or middle management or a whole organization, how are these dynamics playing off of each other, not just in our own heads, but off of like different coworkers together, and executive management to middle management to the front lines. Like, how are all of these playing off of each other? A lot of times we are triggering each other. We're not even showing up connected in the moment. So that's another piece of advice to help moving forward. I mean, that's an overly simplified version, but if you want to start seeing results and start reducing the stress, it's going to take integrity in living in the moment so that you can move forward. Again, overly simplified, but that's really the key. Awesome. Okay, so let's move into the structure our thoughts here. So this, like I said, this is my personal favorite when it comes to entrepreneurs, when it comes to leaders. You could be an entrepreneur. You don't have to own a business to have some of these things. This is where it gets fun, when we want to make something happen in our life. Like we were talking about, like if I want to go on a diet and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get all the vitamins and the supplements and I'm gonna start on Monday and I'm gonna hire a personal trainer. Okay, great. So the entrepreneurial version is, I've got this product that I want to launch or this business that I want to do. And you spend all this time in the vivid visualization. But when it comes to putting it into action in the real world, I'll get to it later. Or, oh, that's somebody else's job. Or I don't really feel like it today. I'll just put it off to tomorrow. So these thoughts they can be so resistant to structure, whether that's for yourself in a business, an organization, when that structure is really there to support us. So you might have an entrepreneurial spirit on your team and they are a go-getter and they have great ideas and they implement. But the minute somebody else, even if it's a boss level person, says, all right, I want you to do this, somehow in this measurement, they start to shut down. They start to resist that structure, where normally if they were a part of the creating it. So it can start to create this extra layer of challenge, so that does in fact impact their performance negatively, even if it's a strength. So when I'm coaching entrepreneurs, especially when it comes to this measurement, we need to learn how to embrace and stop, not just stop resisting, but stop being resentful of the structures. Like structures don't just have to be something like a process. This could be showing up to work on time. So if you're chronically late, you probably have a pressure point in this thought process. You might feel distracted, or you might say, if I wait until the last minute, I'll do my best work. But that's really just an excuse to not do the work right now. And this can also, some of these thought processes playing off of each other can make you resistant to change. It can make you closed-minded. So if it wasn't your idea, how open are you to other people's ideas? When you're in that obsessive thinking, you can also get into that analysis paralysis. You can start to fantasize about things going overly well or catastrophizing. But when we have this gift, because if it's showing up as a red especially, what you want to do is think about, like, okay, how has this worked for me in the past? If I started a business and I showed myself that overanalyzing, I was able to mitigate risk, and I was able to come up with a business plan or create this, and I had all the what if scenarios, and now we were able to reverse engineer that vision into reality, and now we have a step-by-step process. Cool. So celebrate that, honor that. But how can you replicate that in the areas of your life and work that you're currently resisting? And it might be causing you to get distracted and overwhelmed in other areas, playing into some of those other thought processes. And what I do want to ask, and I know this is a very provocative question for this particular group with these measurements, have you ever experienced a time when the rules or policies were more important than people? This could be in a previous job or a rule in the house if you grew up. I have family members who had a very militant childhood because of their parents' jobs. And so it was very regimented, and that was more important than what happened in that child's day. And that created some noise in their head. And so now they're still working with that thought process and becoming hyper aware of it, so they're not passing that on. So I encourage you to think about that. If there's been a time, just using this as an example question to reflect on, that the policies, rules, procedures were more important than the people, how did that impact you and how you went forward? Did you adopt that militant or that very systemic thinking? It's very black or white, this or that, there's no gray. Then how has that served you in the past up until this point? And how is that getting in the way of what you want to create moving forward? How is it getting in the way? How does that show up in your conversations when somebody else doesn't think that way? So I want to just summarize kind of some of all of these measurements. We've gone into some pretty deep topics. We've just skimmed the surface on others, but we know that in the workplace, that mental health readiness or creating a psychologically healthy workplace isn't just about having awareness about mental health issues. While that's certainly important, and providing tools like an employee assistance program or counseling or wellness room, these are all great tools. But what are we doing for ourselves? What are we doing for our employees, our colleagues, to support them to show up as their best selves so that your mentally healthy workplace isn't about crisis management? We know there's been recent studies. If you want to look it up or send me an email about it, you can. There was a survey done this year with Big Health and EHIR, very first of its kind, and they were gauging the maturity, mental health readiness maturity levels of these different organizations. They chose 35 of the large organizations based here in the US. And so this impacted about 2.5 million people's lives. And they did a bunch of different areas in this analysis. But what was interesting to me is we all know there's stuff going on in the world. We all know we all have our own mental baggage, pressure points, noise, things that we're showing up to work for. And when the lines have blurred, work from home, work or homes at work, all of this is all happening. So employers are like, let's implement this program, or let's provide this training, or let's do this so that we can have a retention program and stop hemorrhaging employees. Those programs are great. But again, you can have the best program in the world, but if you don't take into consideration the mental gymnastics that people have to do just to get to the front door, just to show up, then what's the actual true efficacy of that program? The other thing is that what this research found was that even the employers that were providing these resources to support the team weren't measuring the outcomes. They were only, if they did measure, which many didn't, if they did measure, they were only measuring engagement. So today is your opportunity to own your own mental well-being, these strengths, these things that are holding you back. It's your opportunity to take a look. If an organization, they're not going to do it for you. Even in the greatest workplaces, we're all learning and growing. This isn't something that we were all dealing with in workplaces 30 years ago. It just didn't really occur to us. But now that it is at the forefront, this is a great opportunity for us to learn what's working, to measure it, and to see what that progress is. And it starts with yourself, with me. If it's to be, it's up to me. So when we adopt that responsibility, then we can start to see progress. We can implement those programs. But if we take the habit finder just as one tool to see where are our thoughts stacking right now as an individual, as an organization, and when we implement these programs to support, are they working? Let's measure that in 6 months. And then if it isn't working, let's do something different. Otherwise, the risk isn't just the cost to your business. It's not the sales. It's not the flow through, the throughput, the retention. This is real people. This is you. This is your life. And these are the things, whatever you wrote down on that piece of paper, I'm sure that's not the only thing that you want to get out of life, but you owe it to yourself, especially with everything we have all been through this year, to take a really good hard look and just say, all right, I can do something about it. I can step back. It's not going to change overnight, but I can actually choose a different way of thinking. And over time, it is going to be a measurable result that I can bank on. And I can feel really good about it because it's reducing stress and it's making my relationships better. And I actually want to go to work, whatever work looks like for you. So I just want to honor you for having the courage to look at those results for yourself and to go deeper. If you want to go deeper with me, where we go, it's about 90-minute sessions that we're looking at here. You can book a one-on-one call with me. There is a 50% discount that's available until the end of October, which just happens to be in a couple of days, but you can take that time with me anytime before the end of 2021. If you are in a business or an organization who this really resonates with, you're like, all right, yeah, the 3 out of the 4 that remain in the office are completely overwhelmed. We're herding cats. We're not getting the results that we want. We want to really dial it in. We want to offer programs. We need to create something. We want clarity, but we don't know where to begin. I invite you to send us an email and we can create a report of your entire team and look at the anonymized data of what would actually help. What are the top risks for your business so that you can start to reduce those risks and start to leverage the strengths of the thoughts on your team, the most valuable resource there. So there's also free resources available at mindmyhive.com for the grounding practice, which are great to start now in the moment. But again, like we mentioned earlier, the number one thing that you can do once you start to have clarity and continue to explore that, to see results, to move forward in your life, is to get really honest, to really just think about what are the commitments that I can make to myself. Start with one. Don't overdo it. Don't make it a huge program. What's one commitment I can make to myself and keep, so that over time I can build on that and start to show up as my best self the way that I want to, whether that's what your Myers-Briggs said or however you want to show up. You get a chance to redefine that if that's not working for you anymore.
Amanda, what a fantastic session. I am telling you, it was absolutely wonderful. Tracy, can you go back one slide? I have a few questions for Amanda. Okay, so you mentioned that some organizations, they can get this reimbursement with their company through professional training and development. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't really aware of this until after the fact with some of my clients, but I'm not going to say every business or organization, but what I found was interesting, though individuals can certainly invest in their own professional development, many organizations do offer this as a part of their budget, especially right now when there's a need. There's certainly a need, to say the least. So that's something I would bubble up to your line manager. And if you own a business, we can look at different options too, but that we're offering the discount for the one-on-one session where we can really go deep. And then there's options after that, of course, too, but we can certainly, work with your organization's budget if you want to take a look at, your own results, or if the team wants to, so that you're not also having to shoulder that financial burden for something that's really needed right now.
Excellent, thank you. I see someone has their hand raised. If you could type your question in chat, that would be fantastic, Tiffany. Thank you so much. The other thing is, when it comes to additional resources, you have down here the grounding practice. What is that?
I'm so glad you asked. Okay, so you might think when you read that, if you're not used to doing a grounding practice or meditation, that seems like really woo-woo. Well, it could be if you want it to be. It's not religious. It's not about any sort of existential crisis or situation. This is really an audio recording so that you can just bring yourself back to the moment, be grounded in the moment. So if you want to look at it as a guided meditation, great. You're not going into hypnosis or anything like that. It's a great opportunity to just take a break from whatever. You go out to your car, you go, put yourself in your bedroom for a few minutes, close your eyes, and just listen to the audio to bring you back to the moment, to what's actually happening, especially in those moments. If you find that you're being triggered by something, or if you find that your thought process wants to take you on a ride, this is a great time to go, wait, time out. I don't have time to go catastrophize today, but I do have time to do the grounding practice. So I can just come right back to center and feel peaceful, feel that real in your body, feel peaceful, and focuses on your breathing. So.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have another question about your strategy session. Is that for individuals or teams? Could you go through that for us one more time?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep. So let's say you are like, yes, I absolutely want to go deeper, and I'm an individual, so I'm going to go do that for myself. You'll book it, and then we'll do a Zoom call. And in that, we'll take a look at your habit finder assessment, and we're going to go through every section with there really is no stone left unturned. So we are going to explore in a confidential way, how is this showing up in your life, so that you can have that clarity, not in general terms, because we are dealing with a very large group here. Let's go into what's happening for you. And then we'll talk about how you can create a plan that supports your lifestyle, how you want to move forward, what results you want to see, and what's going to work with the amount of time. I mean, do you have time to dedicate to this on a daily basis, weekly, monthly? And then what are some other options that we can bring in to support you so you can move forward? If you're an organization and you're like, okay, I've got a team of 100 people and we definitely need a strategy for January through the middle of the year to see, what results to stop hemorrhaging money or whatever the objectives are. I mean, I will be honest, if you look at any job description, core competencies of the role, there is not one core competency we can't tie back directly to these thoughts. So the good news is, for a team environment, we can take a look and go, okay, we are going to do some workshops over the course of the 6 months. But first, we're going to start off by taking a look at what's actually happening, because every business is different. Every pressure point and every person is. So of course, in different industries, that's going to show up differently. So before we would get into the solution side, if you are interested in doing that as more than one person, I mean, we've had families do it. We've had, other organizations that are in a workplace do this to invest in quality of life. And it really depends on what you want to get out of it. But just send us an email and we can set up a call and talk about how that might look like for your organization.
Excellent. And your email is hello@cloverkind.com. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Very good. Tracy, do you have any words of wisdom or comments? Because this has been a fantastic APTO session again for professional development. It's been amazing. Thank you, Amanda.
Yep, it really has. I think there's so many take home points there that, I mean, it's just the self-awareness, identifying where you might have some of those blind spots or weaknesses. And I think it's just that being true to yourself, like admitting it is the first step to, making the changes and making the improvements. So I think if nothing else, if everybody has that as a takeaway, I think that's huge. So fantastic job, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to just interject. I mean, I realize we still have time if there's questions, but I just want to say a huge thank you to AFDO and to Tara and Tracy and Amy. And for the participants here, I don't know if you realize how much hard work, I wouldn't say blood, sweat, and tears, but it's probably during the times we're living, I don't really know, but I know you are all putting in a lot of work behind the scenes to make these webinars possible. And that is just a tiny part of what you do as a day in the life. And it's just a huge gift to have this opportunity in this community where we can come, we can work on ourselves, and we can not worry about how other people think about it. This is a safe environment. It's a great opportunity to grow from wherever you are at. And I just love each of your ladies' dedication and hard work and approach to that. And then inviting me into this has just been such a gift. So I just really appreciate that. And it's something to look forward to. So thank you.
You're welcome. And we feel the same about you, Amanda. You're put into our lives for a good reason, and we're thankful to have you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions. We do have thank yous going on in chat to you, Amanda. Very informative, thought expanding. People are really just very appreciative of your time. And thank you, everyone, for spending a beautiful fall day with all of us. And we will see you at the next AFTO Professional Development Series webinar. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Tracy, Amy. Thank you, participants.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.